Thank you very much. Good morning, Sawubona, bonjour, and thank you very much, Honorable Shabalala. Excellencies, honorables, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, allow me to rest on the already established protocols. And just to give a brief background, while I'm hoping someone can give me the HDMI cable to be able to make the presentation. I just want to say that we're working in a consortium as International IDEA. We lead the consortium, but we work with other partners, including FEMNET, led by Memory, they're here. Farwe, I don't know if they are represented. We have representation from Padare, that is an organization based in Zimbabwe, working on male allyship for gender equality. Okay. We're also working with an organization in South Africa called Gender Links. You may have come across it. Excellent. Gender Links is here. We're also working with Women in Law in South Africa. I don't know if they're here. And we have an organization that we work with. We work with the University of Sheikh Anta Diop in Senegal, and the Gender Parity Caucus in Senegal, IFAN. So we are consortium. So this work of the barometer is actually through work of the consortium members, and is one thing that we're very proud about because it situates women's political leadership in Africa as of, I must say, the early part of 2024. So some statistics that we'll present may have changed. I can continue with the presentation while we try and see how to connect. Just allow me, if you will. So what have we looked at in terms of the barometer? We used a framework that is an Africa-based framework. We call it the Mitsinso framework. Forgive my pronunciation, it's very lousy for the names. But basically we look at access, participation, representation, so that we can have transformation. Now this framework is premised on the fact that if you don't have access, if you don't participate, it's very hard also to come up with representation on the continent, and therefore to have transformative leadership in this continent where women are involved, included, and are able to participate, it will be very hard. So allow me to just say some overriding things that we came across while doing this barometer. One, to be able to come up with some of the statistics that are in the barometer, we had an attitude survey. Gender Links is in the room. Attitudes and perception survey. This was only conducted in the SADC region, not in the other regions in Africa. And that actually informed a lot of things that came out of the barometer. Okay, I'm being told I stand between tea and tea and the photo, so I will be very quick. So there were a total of, this first barometer was conducted in 2021, and between 2021 and when the barometer was published, we'd had 36 elections, of which 32 were at national level and 18 were local level. At a national level, we had 19 African countries increase women's political participation and representation. 3 countries remained static, while 9 countries regressed. At a local level, we had 6 countries that had an increase, and 4 countries remained static, and 2 countries decreased. Now, in the room, we have a lot of organizations that have been working on women's political participation, and it says that we have much work to do. On the overall, we had slight increases in almost all the indicators that were measured, except in heading political parties. And one of the key things that came up is we had in all these elections, and mainly these elections were held in West Africa, we had an increase of 1% of women sitting at national or local level representation. So now that it's up, I can stick to the presentation and hopefully make it faster for me. If you could go to the next slide. Yes, thank you. In the lower houses of parliament, you can see we had a very slight increase from 25% in 2021 to 26% in 2024. That's a 1% increase. In the upper houses of parliament, we had an increase also 1% from 20 to 21. Parliament overall, both houses, we had an increase from 24 to we had an increase from 24% to 25. And in the political party leadership, and we're looking at only 3 top positions, we had a decrease from 12% to 9%. In the EMBs, we had an increase, and that was probably the highest performing that we had. We had 29%. This statistic has changed because we have had one other woman heading an EMB starting in June of this year, so that percent has increased. At the local government level, we have had an increase of 4% from 21 to 25. Speakers within the parliaments from 21 to 25. Mayors of capital cities. This is where we are actually doing very well in Africa. We have had an increase from 19% to 29%. And in top executive positions, we've had a slight increase to 13% from 7%, while in cabinet, we only have had a 2% increase from 22 to 24. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah, we've talked about that. So in terms of the elections, women in the lower houses, we can see how it is situated in Africa. In Africa overall, we can see the trend from 2000, 2010, and 2024. So you can see the trend. It's generally going up, which is good. And I think this is something that speaks to the results of advocacy and legal reform within the countries if we've had this kind of increases. I think the best increase from what we see in the statistics was East Africa, because the regional disparities also come across. So East Africa is doing well. The Horn of Africa has also increased. Southern Africa, North Africa also, Central Africa, and West Africa is also on the increase, even if it's still lagging behind, but I think that is a good result and says something to the work of the people sitting here. Next slide, please. Now, in this slide, you will see how it looks for Africa, at least as of probably May 2024. In the lower houses of parliament, we had 61% in Rwanda, That statistic has gone up after the July elections to 63%. And in Nigeria, we have 61% in Rwanda, and Nigeria 4%. It tells us there is a lot of work to be done. That is also in terms of work that needs to be done, even in other countries. You can see Algeria, Gambia, Guinea-Bissau, Liberia. Liberia has had a woman president, but look at their statistics of other areas of representation. Botswana, DRC. On the other hand, we're looking at Rwanda, which is very high, 63%. Senegal, South Africa, Namibia, they have elections soon. Mozambique, they've just had elections, so some of these statistics may have changed in the recent months. Next slide. Sorry. It's going way ahead of what I'm looking at. Yeah, women's representation in the single and lower houses of parliament. Here we're looking at a global picture and where Africa stands. So in the world, we have about 27%. In the Americas, they lead with 35%. We have Europe at 31%. We have Sub-Saharan Africa at 27%. Africa, when we include North Africa, we have 26%. The Pacific at 23%. Asia at 21%. Middle East and North Africa, the MENA region, women have a lot of issues coming into politics. That has decreased from 2021. That has decreased to 16. If we look at the electoral systems, we realize that these are key factors. The electoral systems and special measures are key factors that increase women's representation. In terms of the electoral systems, in Africa we have three main types. We have first past the post, we have proportional representation, and mixed, a mixed system where we use both. Now, they all have advantages and disadvantages. I will not go into that slide, so I'll skip that slide. But if we look at the top 10 countries of women in lower houses in Africa, it may be a story that we need to interrogate. With proportional representation, we still have Rwanda doing quite well. South Africa, Namibia, Mozambique, Cape Verde, Burundi, Cameroon, and Angola. With a mixed system where you have probably first past the post, and we also use proportional representation. We have Senegal that's doing very well. And I was talking about proportional representation with Rwanda and the rest. Mixed was Senegal. And first past the post, if we look at Ethiopia, the results are quite good, actually. We look at Tanzania, the results are quite good, and Uganda. But in most other African countries, first past the post is the electoral system used by most of the countries in the lower, which have lower representation of women. So let's look at the bottom countries, and we can see why we have that. If we look at first past the post, we have Nigeria, which is the worst performing, Gambia, 9%. So the bottom countries that have the least in terms of women's representation actually use the first past the post electoral system. DRC has a mixed system, and Sao Tome and Principe has proportional representation, but still at the bottom, Guinea-Bissau and Algeria. So this is something that we need to interrogate further. In terms of temporary special measures, we find that 41 out of 54 African countries have some form of quota. And there are three different types of quotas: legislated quota, reserved seats, and voluntary party quota. And they've also produced different results. But what do we learn from all this? That the combination of electoral systems and quotas play a significant role in increasing the number of women elected to decision-making bodies. It is possible for any type of quota to be combined with an electoral system to increase women's political participation. And a favorable electoral system and quota alone don't necessarily guarantee the desired outcome. In the barometer, we analyze some of the factors that influence the effectiveness of these systems and combinations of these systems. Combinations of electoral systems and quotas, this is in the lower house and local government. You can see how it actually plays a role in and what that means in terms of getting more women into the political space. But this has not necessarily increased women's political participation to the level we want, but it says that it can go with any type of electoral system. If you have a quota, it can go with any type of electoral system. Now, let's talk about political parties. In terms of political parties, we have seen that the leadership of political parties, that is where women have performed not very well. Political parties in Africa a lot of times are owned by men, don't really have, voluntary party quotas. The party can decide whether to have women or not. Even where there are laws, they will try quite efficiently to avoid actually going and doing what they're supposed to do within the parties, or put women in the places where they are least expected to win. Now, women's representation and what this entails. In Africa as a whole, we have seen the top 3 positions, we have a decrease. But in Southern Africa, we have seen an increase in women leading political parties, the top 3 positions. In East Africa, this has dropped. In Central Africa, we do not have women taking the top 3 positions in any party. And this is the same in the Horn, in the West, and in the North of Africa. So we can see where clearly the work is cut out in Africa. In terms of the political parties, 26 out of 104 political parties have women in the top tier, the 3. This is an indication of political party commitment, but there is no real political will to implement. E.g., success in South Africa, Namibia, Mozambique, where representation has increased, but where Botswana has just come through the elections, and Malawi, the parties don't even observe their own quotas. Oh, sorry. That is where we are at. In terms of electoral management bodies in Africa, what is the role of electoral management bodies, and do they actually promote or become barriers to women political participation? In Africa, if we look at the EMBs and the representation, we find 29% of women who head EMBs are women. In East Africa, we have 45% women in the electoral management bodies. But please note, the increase was very slight. It was almost insignificant when they looked at the number of women in electoral management bodies. In South Africa, this decreased from 40% to 37%. In West Africa, it rose slightly to 26%. In the Horn, it rose to 30%, which was good, from 21%. So the highest increase actually is in the Horn of Africa. is in the north of Africa, where we had a rise from 15, we had a decrease in the north of Africa from 25% to 15%. So we can see the decreases are happening dramatically in the north, while in Central Africa this has increased. So it's a very mixed picture in Africa in terms of the electoral management bodies and the women in the electoral management bodies. What we need to also ask ourselves is, does a woman heading an electoral management body actually increase the numbers of women working at the electoral management bodies? And does this actually translate into making it easier for women to go into elective politics? So in terms of funding, this has been a key critical barrier for women to get into elections. So we realize that in most African countries, actually 70% of countries provide direct funding, public funding. Your tax actually goes into the political parties. Yet, what does that translate to when it comes to women's leadership? Only 17% of countries have actually gender-targeted public funding to promote women's political representation. And I think this is really good and something to emulate. If we look at a country like Togo, we have public funding allocation mechanisms where they reward successful candidates, and it also has reduced application fees for those who want to vie. In a country like Algeria, political parties receive state funding based on the number of women elected. In a country like Cape Verde, it only awards public funding to parties that have at least 25% women candidates. And I think that is a good thing to have. But are there punitive measures that are being are working in the different countries in Africa, so that if you don't have women in your political party or within your candidates list, all women elected, is there anything punitive within your countries? And is that something we should push for, so that they are forced to comply? Because it's on paper, but compliance is very low. One key barrier to women getting into elective politics is violence against women and in politics. And violence is any form or threat, coercion, intimidation. I think someone spoke very eloquently in the morning about this kind of violence that happens. So I will not speak too much to that, but let's see what that has done in terms of keeping women out of elective politics. In terms of psychological violence, it's 80%. Now, 80% of women who go into elective politics face psychological violence. What does that mean? Can she perform? Honorable, you might tell us some of the experiences you had. Some women around here have also faced that. Sexist kind of attitudes, remarks, overtures towards those who go into elective politics, threats, including death, rape, beating, abduction. I think we've seen that a lot in many countries. Harassment. There's been a lot of harassment, including sexual harassment. There has been a lot of violence. The men send goons, your political opponents, when they see you're very popular, they will send goons to come and beat you up, embarrass you. They will threaten you also, not just you, but also your family members, your children, your husband is called names. So it keeps a lot of women out of elective politics. If we look at, we had that because she said, this was a presidential candidate in Senegal, Anta Babakar. She was quite popular, at least when we went to Senegal in November before the elections in March. And you can see it has taken the form of intimidation, threats, smear campaigns aimed at damaging credibility and public image. She has had to deal with analysis by political writers that are critical and caustic. And I think a lot of women face that. She's not alone. However, I have seen debates on television revolving around my dress code, which has never been the case for any of my male candidates. It doesn't matter if he goes in a t-shirt and shorts. But the day a woman wears probably a dress that's tight or, that exposes parts of her body, they will focus on that and not the message or the work that the female candidate has done. So, one other key barrier to women in politics is media. It is both a fantastic opportunity. Social media is a two-edged sword. It's a fantastic opportunity, but also creates a lot of barriers for women going into elective politics. So the extent to which media reflects the views and voices of women is critical, and it's a measure of how much freedom that we can have as women. Now, let's look at what has been in the media. Now, according to the 2020 Global Media Monitoring Project, 30% of all news items carried in African newspapers, television, and radio is on politics and governance. 30%, that's huge, considering how many other issues are there in Africa. Now, in online platforms, this trend also continues. So 25% of online platforms actually focus on politics and governance. In Africa, the women only constitute 18% of news sources, 22% in the topics of politics. So you have all these other issues, but even when they cover politics at 30%, women will only be, if we take that 30% as the 100% of coverage, they only take 22%. The rest, 78%, is men covered in politics. Now, this is compared to the global average of 20%, so it means we probably are doing better in Africa, but it's still very bad. In terms of online, this has constituted a whole new barrier, and it is bad because they're using deep web, fake news. They are creating stories, exposing women, and thus keeping them out. I see you, Maureen. I'm about to finish. The role of men. Are men allies, or are they actually part of the problem? Are they the solution? Should we look at men to having them as the solution? Now, men are gatekeepers and actually barriers, and it starts at the household level. And they are also the gatekeepers of tradition and culture. I think you spoke very eloquently on Honorable Shabalala, on men being assigned roles that were actually women, rainmakers. They are now called the king. They were called the kings. Now they're called the queens. That says something. But men also dominate the current landscape in Africa. They are heads of states. They are the ones who own the media. They are the ones who own the party. So when you're a woman trying to make it through these elections and you have men in all these areas, how do you navigate that? It was found that as long as men choose to make it difficult, it will be very hard to access. And remember, we started with access. So it will be very hard to actually have more women participate. It is very clear that, therefore, we must engage with the men for women to actually make it through elective politics. And to do this, we also want to stimulate the changes in attitudes and perceptions. I think the attitude surveys were very telling. And this also has to go through the institutions that are there. So, in essence, men are beginning to promote women's political participation. We have seen this in through Padare's work. They're working with the traditional gatekeepers of culture. And once, we've seen in some communities, once the traditional leaders, the chiefs say, it's fine, we give you our blessings, ask for this from the culture, people are actually making it through the politics. It's also the same thing with the political party leaders. Once they endorse, it's very easy for the woman to make it through elected politics. So we have the first AU male champion for positive masculinity, that is the president of the DRC. And we hope that there will be more women who will go through elective politics in DRC in the coming elections. It was not a very good result last year, but we hope that there will be more women because they have a president who is championing positive masculinity within the AU. And that he will also lead the other presidents in Africa to do this. I think I'll skip the next few slides. But I would want to talk about age. Young women in politics in Africa. I know that this is something that has been a key issue in Africa. We have very few young women coming into elective politics, and even when it's legislated. So if we have the definition of youth in Africa is up to 35, we will still pick somebody at 45 or 55 and still say they are youth. But nevertheless, as of 2022, around 40% of the population in Africa was 15 years and younger, compared to a global average of 25. So we have a very young, youthful population in Africa. The share of Africa's youth globally is forecasted to increase to 42% by 2030. Almost half of the population in Africa will be young people. And yet, if we look at the average age of presidents, vice presidents, prime ministers, members of parliament, we are talking about people who probably left youth 30 years ago. The definition of the African definition of youth, 30, 25 years ago, and are not ceding space and not even allowing or mentoring the younger people to come in. So this is something that is critical that we have to work on. I'll end by a very nice quote,